Okay, so we've got Last of Us season 2, episode 6 recap thoughts. Obviously not theories because I know it's going to happen, so I can't really have theories about it. And I don't want to spoil anything. Spoiler warning, pretty simple. Anything that's happened up to this point in the show is for fair game, including this episode. So I don't know why you'd be watching the recap if you haven't seen the episode yet. So go watch the episode. Um Anything in the game up until this point that's been shown in the show also up for discussion with myself. So yeah, just if you haven't played the game at all, haven't watched the show, just come back after you've done all that, and we'll get into it. Okay, as I predicted, this episode was the flashback episode. Now, I'm not Nostradamus. I'm not some incredibly intelligent being who just can see the future. Based off the trailer from last week, I knew that this was going to be the flashback episode. And that's what we got. All flashbacks the entire episode. It was about an hour long, so we see a lot of Joel again, which was cool. We haven't seen him in a few episodes. And I don't think the show's been lacking without him, but it's always nice to get Pedro Pascal. And I think this is probably the last time we're going to see him in the show. So that was obviously sad, but it was cool to see him get like a proper send-off this way. All right. We start out with the cold open in Austin, Texas in 1983, I believe. So obviously this is a super flashback that's not even in the game. Now what this is a flashback to Joel's childhood. We see young Tommy crying, saying like, "Oh, I'm going to get the belt. Dad's going to be really mad at me." And Joel says, "No, he won't. Don't worry. I'll get the belt. You just go to your room. I'll talk to him." So this is like in the afternoon. It's daytime when they're having this conversation. Cut to the next scene, and a cop car pulls up to the house, and it's nighttime, and Joel's dad walks in. Played by, let me look this up, because he's a pretty famous actor. Always just killing it. Javier Miller, Joel's dad, played by Tony Dalton. So, his name's Javier. He walks in, and Joel lies to him and says, he's like, "All right." Well, he walks in, the dad walks in, and he's like, "I've got 30 minutes before I'm back on patrol. Tell me what happened and talk fast." Joel says, "Well, I was trying to buy drugs, and the guy tried to rip me off." By the way, Joel's probably like 16, and Tommy's like 14 or something like this. They're teenagers, but not like fully grown adults, obviously. Joel says he was trying to buy some pot from this kid, and the kid was trying to rip him off, so they got in a fight. Javier, though, is like, "I know you're lying to me. I talked to the officer who, like, broke up the fight. Tommy was trying to buy the drugs. You're trying to cover for him. Like, I'm not stupid." And so Joel gets really mad and looks at his dad and says, "You're not going to hurt him." So it's pretty clear that there's some abuse going on with Javier and his children. And I fully expected to see some of that abuse happen right here. I mean, this is classic, like, domestic violence type shit. When the kid says, like, "You're not going to hurt my little brother," and then the dad just, like, loses his mind and starts beating the crap out of him. That didn't happen, though. Javier walks to the fridge, gets 2 beers out of the fridge, walks it back to the kitchen table, opens both of them up, puts one in front of Joel, and he tells Joel a story. The story he tells Joel is about when he was a kid and he stole a candy bar. Now, he stole the candy bar, and his granddad, or not his granddad, Joel's granddad, but Javier's dad, found out about him stealing the candy bar. Made him apologize to the shop owner. They were on their way home, and Javier says he was just about to get out of the car when his dad looked at him and just hit him. And he did that in the show. There was like a really strong smack. Anyway, Joel's granddad broke Javier's jaw. He was like 10 years old, I think. Broke his jaw. He had to be wired shut. His jaw had to be wired shut for 2 months. And Javier's like, the way he's talking about this was kind of weird. He's like almost reminiscing about it. Like it was like a funny thing that happened. He's not like laughing, but he's there's clearly some detachment here with him. And so he says, your grandmother thought I was dead. There was blood everywhere. Like I said, his jaw was wired shut for 2 months. And Joel asks him, well, if you know what it feels like, then why do you do it? And Javier breaks down here saying that, sure, he hits Tommy and Joel, and occasionally he can go too far, but he's never done that with them. And it was like a weird justification of like his own violence to his children to be like, well, at least I'm not doing that. And Javier says that it was humiliating because everybody in town knew what had happened. They all knew that it was his jaw was broken because of his dad. And so it's just a humiliating experience because the whole town knows that your dad broke your jaw and you're 10 years old. Javier then he's tearing up at this point, and he says, that's not why I'm telling you this story. I think I'm doing a little better than my dad did. And when you have a kid, I hope you do a little better than I did. And I hesitate to say I like this because I don't like the abuse aspect of it. But I think it's a pretty accurate thing to say that like parents over time discipline their kids differently. Like how my parents were disciplined is not how I was disciplined. And how I was disciplined is not gonna be how I discipline my kids. It's just society is progressing into less violent means of disciplining your children. So I thought that was pretty interesting to think about. Just within the episode, and I was glad we didn't see Javier like beat the shit out of Joel. I did not want to see that. But also we're getting kind of Joel. This is not in the game, so this was totally new. We're getting Joel's backstory and kind of like Craig Mazin talked about this in the after the episode, like the genesis of his savior complex, to where he's like, even here, he's trying to protect Tommy by lying and putting his body on the line for someone he loves. Like the most important person to him in the world at that point would have been Tommy. So that was interesting to see. Joel's father then gets up, he's leaving the house, and he puts his hand on Joel's shoulder, and we see on his wrist the watch. The watch that Joel was wearing when Sarah got shot. So it's just added another wrinkle to know that the watch was not only Joel's, but it was passed down to Joel by his father. So very cool scene. I liked getting some more backstory on Joel, of course. And I thought Tony Dalton did a fantastic job. Is that his name, Tony Dalton? Yes, Tony Dalton. I thought Tony Dalton did a great job as Javier Miller. And this was a pretty quick scene, like 3 or 4 minutes, not too long. We then get into the intro. Nothing really to talk about here except at the end, now instead of there just being one person standing, there's now 2 again. So Joel is back, so there's 2 people at the end of the intro. We cut to the bar in Jackson, and this Joel walks up to the bar, and Seth is working as a bartender behind the bar, and Seth is like, "Oh, it's the new guy," and Joel's like, "I'm not the new guy, Seth. I've been here for 2 months. Like, what are you talking about?" Joel then brings him some Legos that Seth wanted for his grandkids, and Seth says, "Okay, cool. I like trade's a trade. We can have what you need by Friday." And Joel says, "No, no, no, no. I need it tomorrow." And Seth goes, "Okay, vanilla or chocolate?" If you say vanilla, it's easier. Joel says, "Okay, vanilla." Joel then says, "There's something else I need." And Seth like gets a little prickly here, and he's like, "Oh, great, what now?" He's like, "Don't worry, you have a lot of them." And it turns out to be a bone, which we'll get into in just a second. Seth also reveals that he used to be a cop, because Joel, he basically asks Joel where he found the Legos, and Joel says, "Oh, I found them in these houses in a neighborhood around." And Seth says, "Oh, I looked there. Like, why didn't I find them?" And Joel says, "Why? I'm a smuggler, so I know where people hide things. You are this, so, whatever. And Seth says, I wasn't always this. I was a cop, part of Milwaukee PD. And you see this look on Pedro Pascal's face where he's like, oh, great, a cop. Because he's probably just, my read of this is he's thinking about his dad being a cop, and he's like, oh, one of these guys. And so he brushes up against that a little bit. Anyway, he needs a bone from Seth, and so Seth gives him the bone, and Joel goes home and fixes up a guitar for Ellie. And the restoration job he does on this guitar is insane. He takes the bone, cuts it up into like a little strip, and makes a saddle for the guitar. And if you don't know what a saddle is for the guitar, it's where like the strings go into the guitar and you put the pegs in. The saddle is what like lifts the strings up right above the pegs at the bottom of the guitar around the hole. A bone saddle is like a very high end piece that you would only find on like very expensive guitars. But Joel makes it himself from a dog bone, like a bone you'd give your dog. He sands that down and like cuts it up to that little strip and makes it just perfect. He then takes a drill and drills a moth inlay into the fretboard and adds some like silver paint, maybe. I don't know what it is, but it looks great. And he gets this guitar into like mint condition. We then get a shot of the watch. I think this is meant to symbolize that Joel thinks he's being better than his father was. And he is, in the sense that he cares about Ellie. He is keeping the promises he made to her, but he still kind of has some of those patterns of violence from his father, because the next scene we see Ellie walk in with Tommy, and she's got a bandage on her arm, and she's like high, very high. And Joel's like, what happened? Tommy's like, oh, she's on painkillers. She's okay. And Joel's like, painkillers? And he like freaks out. And he like starts talking to Ellie. He's like, what happened? What happened? And Tommy's like, she burned her arm on a pot. And so Joel's like, what? Why? What do you mean? Like, just immediately accusing. And so while he believes he's better than his father, and I think he is. Well, he did murder all those people in the hospital, so I don't know. But he's clearly still got some of those violent tendencies towards Ellie. Now, he doesn't hit her or anything like that. Tommy is in like, she was working and she burned her arm on a pot. And Joel like asks Ellie why, and she's like, I just put my arm against it. And she's like really high. Bella Ramsey did a great job in this scene. Ellie was really high after she's on the painkillers, and she's like, do you know what it smelled like? It smelled like pork. And it's just a really funny scene. But then we get the line from the game where she says, I just really wanted to wear short sleeves again. So Ellie burned her arm on the pot to cover up her bite mark so that she could wear short sleeves. We then get like a nice scene with Joel and Ellie where Joel sits down on the bed, like gives her a hug, and he's like, just go to bed, it'll be okay. So Ellie goes to bed, wakes up the next day, and she walks down into the kitchen, and Joel has the cake that he traded the Legos for from Seth. Now, Joel is not happy because Seth cannot spell for shit. On the cake, it says, happy 15th birthday, Eli. And, so Joel's mad. He got the Legos, and Seth didn't come through exactly like he wanted him to. But regardless, he got Ellie a birthday cake. So it's Ellie's birthday. It's her 15th birthday. And Joel turns around to, like, get the plates and the knives to, like, cut the cake and blah, blah, blah. And he says, oh, I hope Seth bakes better than he spells. But as he turns around, we see that Ellie has just reached her hand into the cake and just got a mouthful. And she's like, he does. It's really good. And so that was just a fun little scene. Joel then presents the guitar to Ellie. And Ellie has cake all over her hand. She also doesn't know how to play. But Joel says, I promise to teach you. And so if you want a lesson later, I'd be happy to give you one. And Ellie says, well, why don't you just play me something right now? Play and sing. And Joel's like, oh, no, I don't sing. And Ellie's like, it's my birthday. Like, you have to do this. It's my birthday. Joel then sits down and plays Future Days, which is the first time we've actually heard it in the show. Obviously, in the game, it's early on. But here, we hear him play the Pearl Jam song. And This is not a huge deal, but I did notice it. Pedro Pascal is not playing that guitar. Not even a little bit. And it's fine. Like, I get it. It's like a pretty hard skill for people to learn, but I just thought it was pretty funny that there was just no way for them to make it even look like he was playing the guitar. He does sing though, and he sings the song, and yeah, it was just a nice scene. It's one of the best scenes from the early part of the game. So it was cool to get that in this flashback episode. After that, we cut to 1 year later, so it's Ellie's 16th birthday, and we get the long awaited museum trip. Obviously, this is a classic flashback from the game where Joel takes Ellie to the Natural History Museum, I think. Natural History Museum, yes. They're walking through the creek, and Ellie's guessing what the surprise is on the way. You know, is it a dinosaur? Is it water guns? Is it um, something else? Blah, blah, blah. She then is talking to Joel about wanting to go on patrol because she says, well, Jesse got to go on patrol when he was 16. Joel says, why don't you just enjoy being a kid for a while? Which is something that I think all parents tell their kids, especially when they're around that age, trying to grow up too fast. And Ellie says, oh, yeah, because childhood's been so great for me so far, which was funny and also true. Joel then asks, is there something going on between Ellie and Jesse? Obviously, we know Ellie is, she's a lesbian, so obviously there's not anything going on between her and Jesse. But Joel is like, doesn't see this, it was interesting that they live in the same house. Joel's been around her for years now and just still has missed this like key part of Ellie. He says, oh, I have a keen eye for these things. And Ellie's like, I don't think you do. And just leaves it at that. Joel then asks if anyone's talked to Ellie about the birds and the bees. And Ellie says, oh, you mean penises and vaginas? And Joel's like, oh my God, Ellie. He's like, and Ellie says, look, I promise I won't get pregnant if you let me go on patrol. And Joel says he'll think about it. So just a fun little banter scene between them where Ellie like isn't willing to have the conversation yet with Joel. Like, I don't like boys. I like girls. So I just thought that was kind of interesting that these people who know each other so well, Joel just doesn't notice this about Ellie. It's like he almost doesn't want to notice it in a way. I don't know. We then get to a clearing and we see the T-Rex outside of the museum. Ellie freaks out. She's like, oh my God, it was a dinosaur. She climbs to the top and Joel's freaking out because she like climbs up the back of the T-Rex to his head and is like standing on the head, jumping around. And she's like, Joel, there's a museum over there. And Joel's like, yeah, if you don't fall off the damn T-Rex, I'll take you. So Ellie climbs down. And like I said, we see the museum in the distance, so we know we're going to the museum. The thing I got the most from this episode is Joel is incredible at giving gifts. The thought and the work that goes into these gifts, like the guitar took him forever. Well, maybe it just took him a day. I don't know. But the amount of effort and work that went into finding all those things, getting the Legos so that he can get a birthday cake for Ellie, finding this museum, going to the museum first and clearing it out. I'm sure he had to do that with the infected and some other things he did in the museum that we'll get to in just a second. He is like amazing at giving gifts. And I don't know. I've just never gotten a gift with this much thought behind it. Now, they are in the apocalypse, so what else do you have to do, I guess? But regardless, we get to the museum. They skip probably like half the museum, I would say. But we start out and they're in the long hallway with it's like glitter on the walls, but it's supposed to look like space because it's dark and they have the flashlights, and that looked so cool. I don't know. I watched after the episode and they said they just put a bunch of rhinestones on the wall and that's what was giving it off the shine with the flashlights. It looked amazing. Ellie then walks in and she sees the little planet thing. I need to look up what this calls. I think it's called an orrery, but let me make sure. Yes, an orrery. Orrery. It's like a mechanical solar system. And so it's mechanically powered to where you crank it, the planets move and the sun like lights up. And Ellie goes and she cranks it and she's like, "Oh my God, it works." And Joel's like, "Yeah, somebody must have greased it." And it's like he went into museum. Obviously, he had to check it out first, make sure it was safe. But not only did he make sure it was safe, he greased up this machine because he knew Ellie would want to use it. And he just knows everything about Ellie. And it's just crazy. He knows she loves space. He found the perfect gift for her to take her to the museum to see all this space stuff. She then says, "Oh, wouldn't that be cool to go to space?" And Joel says, "Well, would you like to?" And we go around the corner and we get the spaceship scene. There is I guess it's the top of the rocket. I'm not really sure, but where the astronauts sit, I think it's the top of the rocket. And I need to figure out what that's called. It's Space capsule is probably not the right word. Top of the rocket. What? Top of a rocket. The nose cone. That's what it's called. So we see the nose cone from the Apollo 15, and Joel tells her, like, hey, this one went up and back. Apollo 15, 1971. I don't know in the Apollo 15, but I'm pretty sure that's what he says. Ellie's like looking through the window. She's like, oh my God, this is crazy, Joel. Like, this is awesome. Blah, blah, blah. Joel's like, well, open it up. And so she cracks open the lid and she's climbing in. And Joel's like, whoa, 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 whoa. You're going to space. You need a helmet. So he gives her a rock and lets her pick one of the space helmets out of the display cases. She picks one, throws a rock through it, picks out the helmet, gets in, and then we get like maybe my favorite scene from Last of Us Part 2. Ellie climbs in and she's like, wow, this is awesome. Like, they sat right here. The astronauts sat right here. And Joel hands her the cassette tape to where Ellie is like, what's this? And he's like, that's something that was very hard to find. And she puts it in her Walkman, puts her headphones in, and Joel's like, close your eyes. It'll be worth it. She closes her eyes, and the launch, I think it's the Apollo 11 launch, but regardless, it's one of those early rocket launches, and it's the countdown sequence from it. And so Ellie is counting down from 30. She's like freaking out. We get a shot of just Bella Ramsey's face, and it counts down. The rocket lifts off. The screen's kind of shaking like you're actually in the rocket. Like you see the light go crazy, like the engines are engaged. And then we get up, and all the rumbling stops, and there's just a light that like goes across the window to make it look like the sun and like the nose cone's rotating. And it was perfect. It was so well done and just like the game. And I loved it. It was awesome. Because it reminds me, I don't know if this happened in season 1, but it did happen in the DLC for the first game. When you go to the arcade with Riley, you go to the Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat machine, or whatever it is, and Ellie like obviously wants to play it, but the machine doesn't work. So Riley tells her to close her eyes, and like you hit the buttons and you see it lighting up around Ellie, like the game's actually playing. It reminded me a lot of that, and it was really cool just to see like Ellie get to imagine what it would be like to go to space, and this is the closest thing she's ever going to get. Obviously, now that we're in the apocalypse, and Joel has provided that to her with the tape of the launch and all of that. So very well done. I enjoyed it tremendously. Yeah, just no notes. No notes at all. Joel asks if he did okay, and Ellie's like, are you kidding me? This is the best birthday ever. We then see them walking down the path, and Joel hits her with the line every parent has hit their teenage kid. Hey, we should spend more time together. This is nice. And Ellie's like, yep, I'm in. We definitely should do that. That's great. And she stops on the path and looks off, and Joel's like, what? Are you okay? What's wrong? And Ellie's like, yeah, I'm fine. And she starts walking, catches up with Joel, and we get a look at what she saw, which was a bunch of fireflies. So it's clear that what happened in Salt Lake City, she's questioning it now that she's older, and those suspicions are still on her mind. It then flashes forward another year, so we're to her 17th birthday, and it's raining like crazy outside, but Joel comes home, and he's got a chocolate cake this time for Ellie. So he splurged for the chocolate. I don't know what he had to trade Seth to get that, but he gets the chocolate cake. He goes upstairs and he goes to Ellie's room to give her the cake, and he hears another voice in there. Who's like, what's going on? And he knocked on the door, but then he just immediately opened it, which is like something everybody's parents done to them when you're doing some bad shit in your room, where they just like knock on the door as like, I'm coming in, so you got like 2 seconds, and then they open the door, and Ellie is in there with Kat, her first girlfriend, who we also saw in episode 1 as the patrol leader, and they weren't having sex or anything; they were just hanging out. And then turns out though, Kat was giving Ellie a tattoo, which is the like moth fern tattoo she has on her arm. And Joel gets like super pissed here. He's like, all the teenage stuff at once, you're doing drugs, getting a tattoo, you're experimenting with girls. And Ellie's like, well, it's not an experiment. Just so you know. Like let's wake up here, Joel. Not an experiment. But another funny thing that happened in the scene is Ellie's like, why are you here? You're supposed to be on patrol. And Joel's like, well, I came home early to give you this. Happy birthday. And he looks at Kat and he's like, 17, by the way. And she's like, I'm 19, so what? And then Joel looks at her and she's like, okay, I'm going to go. And then leaves. And I just thought this was so funny because, like, obviously, in present day or like in 2003 before the outbreak happened, like 17, 19, that would be a huge deal. So weird. And we've had a lot of talk in just the wider public about age gaps, we'll say. And so I just thought it was, obviously they didn't know about that, but I thought it was kind of interesting to hear that mentioned here. Again, Ellie's like, not an experiment. Not an experiment. I like girls. This is how it is, Joel. Relax. Um, and Joel is like, we'll talk about this later. We'll talk about this when you are yourself. Which she was smoking pot, so maybe she was high. I don't know. Maybe she was high. I don't know. But Joel then leaves the room. We cut to him in bed, and he hears this like banging. But before that, Ellie goes and she like shines her flashlight in the garage. She's like, "All right, cool." We then hear her beating around upstairs. Joel comes out and Ellie's trying to move her mattress out, and Joel confronts her. He's like, "What are you doing? Like, put that down. No, you're not. You're not moving out into the garage. Absolutely not. This is my house, and you're going to follow my rules." Which is also something that everyone's parent has told them from time to time. But Ellie claps back here, and she's like, "No, you don't own this house. You don't own anything. We came here, and Maria and the town gave this house to us. So wrong, Joel. Communism wins. You don't own this house." Obviously, that's not exactly how communism works, but you get what I mean. Joel doesn't own this house. He was gifted this house, and actually, he and Ellie were gifted the house. And so I fully expected Joel to freak out and lose his mind here, but he doesn't. And I was very impressed, I would say, with how he handled it. He just sat down and he was like, maybe it is good for you to have your own space, but it's pissing rain right now. There's no running water, no heat in the garage. Give me a couple days and I'll fix it up, and then we can move your stuff there. And Ellie's like, all right, fine. They put the mattress back on the bed. Joel then is like, can I see the tattoo? So Ellie holds up her arm, and it's like, wow, it's like really, really good work. That's a way better moth than the one I did on your guitar. And he asks about like, so what's the deal with the moths? And Ellie's like, oh, I read about it in a book, and just symbolism and stuff. Joel's like, oh, like growth and change. Like, okay, that's cool. And anyway, then they both go to bed. And I resonated with this on a personal level because I too got a large tattoo on my arm when I was 19. But when I was a young man, I guess I was still a young man, but when I was much younger, and my dad had the same reaction initially, and I think he's grown to like it, but at the time, not so much. And Dad, you can chime in the chat if you disagree. But it was something I was like, well, that happened to me. So that was kind of cool to see. Um, Next morning we cut, and Gail, the therapist, is eating in the restaurant in town. I don't really know what it's called, but she's eating breakfast, reading a book, like just trying to enjoy the morning. And Joel walks up, and no, this was such a funny scene to me. He doesn't give a like, hey, hi, how are you? You know, you doing okay, Gail? Nothing. He just sits down and he's like, hey, did some of y'all study dreams? And she's like, what do I look like? Like, do I have a doctor is in sign just right here on me? Anyway, Joel just doesn't care. He's like, so the dreams. And she's like, yes, some doctors study dreams, mostly the dumb ones, but yes, some did study dreams. And he's like, so what does a moth mean? It's like growth and change and such, right? And Gail says, no, that would be a butterfly. And Joel's like, okay, so what about a moth? And Gail's like, well, a moth symbolizes death, you know, if you believe in that stuff. Joel is immediately taken aback. He's like, whoa, what? Moth means death? Huh? And he just gets up and leaves. Like, Gail is sitting there, like, waiting on Joel. She finally, like, looks up from her book again, and she's like, okay, I'll bite. Why? And Joel's just like, no reason. And just gets up and leaves. And I was like, what a guy. No social skills, just pops in, interrupts this lady's breakfast, and is like, hey, by the way, can I ask you a question? And then just leaves. It's insane. We then cut to Ellie. She's packing up her room, getting ready to move into the garage. We cut over to her dresser, and she's got a bunch of sketches of moths on there. And very clearly written in one of the sketches is that it says, you have a greater purpose. So we get the moth again. And like, that's Ellie's whole thing. It's like, she has a greater purpose, bigger purpose, obviously being her immunity and what that means for the world. We cut to 2 years later. So this is Ellie's 19th birthday. So we skipped the 18th birthday, but, you know, I get it. We can't get all the birthdays. That would be a little much. But we cut to 2 years later, and she's sitting on her bed in the garage, and the camera is on Ellie, but she's talking towards the camera. And she's saying basically that she's got some questions about Salt Lake City, and that she's kind of rehearsing. Well, she's gonna ask the questions, but then it pans out a little bit, and we see, oh, nobody's in there. She's practicing what she's gonna say to Joel. She says, you know, if they spotted us a mile away, if the Fireflies spotted us a mile away from the hospital, how were they surprised by a group of raiders? She then says, if there are, how did they escape if, you know, all the soldiers were fighting and they killed all those soldiers and Marlene, but you had to carry me the whole time and we escaped? Like, that doesn't really make sense. So what's going on? And it's just, she then says, if there are more immune people, then why? And then there's a knock on the door, and we see that Joel has shown up. And I'll get to their conversation here in just a second, but I want to really talk about Ellie questioning what's going on with Joel. Not going on with Joel, but questioning what Joel has told her. Because I think as kids, when your parents tell you something, you're just like, oh, okay, I believe it. But then as you get older, you start to question it, and it's like, well, that didn't make sense. Like, wait a minute, there's a hole here that you're missing. And this also happened to me. Obviously, not as nearly traumatic, but still pretty traumatic. I got attacked by a large German Shepherd when I was a kid, right? And it messed my head up pretty bad. I had like 40 stitches, I think, something like that, 30, 40 stitches in my head, like messed me up bad. And after I got the stitches, I got out of the hospital, I was like, what happened to the dog? And my parents were like, oh, they sent it to a farm. And I just never thought about it again. I was like, oh, the dog went to the farm. Okay. Like 2 years ago, this happened when I was like 9, by the way. And so a couple years ago, I was just thinking about it randomly one day. And I was like, they killed that dog. That dog didn't go to a farm. They killed that dog for sure. And so again, like, you just get older and you start to question things your parents tell you. I think it's just natural. And Ellie's pointing out some pretty big holes here in Joel's story. It's like, wait a minute. They got attacked by raiders, but they have like an incredibly good not survey system, but surveillance area around the hospital. How there were all those soldiers. How'd they get surprised by that? Um, you're telling me that everyone else died, but we got out and you had to carry me? How did that happen? That doesn't make sense. So again, just it's starting to unravel in Ellie's mind where now she's like, I can't rectify these holes in Joel's plan or not plan, his story anymore. And I need answers. So she's got the piece of paper, she's written it all down, which is something else I noticed that, you know, when she gave the speech to go after Joel's killers, she wrote all that down as well because Jesse told her to. But she clearly understands that, when she's having a serious conversation that may get emotional, it's important for her to write her thoughts down because then she can kind of keep her head a little bit. So Joel knocks on the door. Ellie freaks out. She shoves the rehearsed speech in the drawer, opens the door, and Joel's like, "Oh, you're up already? Okay, I thought I was gonna have to wake you up." Well, happy birthday. I talked to them and I said that it's cool if you start going on patrol. So get your coat, grab a gun. We're gonna go on your first patrol. So they get on the trail and they're riding the horses. And Ellie's like, "What's the record for the most infected kills on your first patrol?" And Joel's like, "Zero. This is the safest trail we have. This is just about learning the ropes. Getting used to the protocol and the rules because, again, there are rules in place. This is a dangerous society they live in. So, there's got to be some rules. And Ellie needs to follow those rules if she's ready to go on patrol." Now, Ellie, unsurprisingly, is not taking this seriously at all. So, they are. Joel tells her that, like, on patrol, you're partners and you back your partner up, like, no matter what, blah, blah, blah. Joel's then like, "You need to have your binoculars up, scanning, see if we can see anything." And Ellie gets her binoculars up, and about 5 seconds later, she's like, "Oh my God, Joel!" And Joel's like, "What? What? He's like, "There's a squirrel over there, and the little squirrel is banging the big squirrel." And so obviously she's just not taking it seriously. Joel's like, "All right, fine, we don't have to scan for now." Joel then is like, "Oh, he hits her with the line again of, yeah, it would be nice if we would spend some more time together." And Ellie is much more reserved this time. She's like, "Oh yeah, yeah, but that'd be cool." Whereas before she was like, "Yeah, I'm in. That'd be great." Now she's like, "Yeah, sure, I guess if you want to." Yeah, blah blah blah. So clearly there's something on Ellie's mind. We already know what it is, but Joel is like, "What's going on? Something on your mind?" And their conversation is cut off because Joel's radio goes off, and it says that Eugene and Adam need backup. They've been attacked by infected, and they're the closest patrol, so they need to go check it out. Joel then is like, "All right, Ellie, go back to Jackson." He radios back and tells them to like dig in. He'll be there in a minute. Tells Ellie like, "Go back to Jackson." And Ellie's like, "No, I'm not your kid right now. I'm your partner, and partners stick together, right, Joel?" So she's already throwing that protocol back in his face a little bit, and Joel's like, "Okay, fine." They get closer. They have to leave the horses and like hike down the side of a mountain. And Joel's like, "Remember what I taught you?" And Ellie's like, "I'm your back, you're mine." So they're like, Joel's walking forward and Ellie's walking behind him, like backwards, turned around so that they can make sure they're looking both ways. Then we hear a horse and we see the horse is running past them and it's dragging someone in the saddle. Like he's not in the saddle, his foot is just in the stirrup, and he is like being drugged through the woods. I assume this is Adam because soon we walk up and we see a dead clicker, but then we walk up and we see Eugene. Eugene's leaned up, and this is something that's been teased forever now because in the first episode, when Joel goes to meet Gail, Gail tells Joel that she hates him because he had to kill, or because of how he killed Eugene. So we already know this is not going to end well for Eugene. Eugene's leaned up against a tree, and Joel's like, "Are you clean?" And Eugene's like, "Well, no." And lifts up his like jacket to show he's been bitten on his ribs. And so Ellie's like, before this happens, Ellie's like, "Oh, it's Eugene," and like goes to walk up to him, and Joel's like, "Hang on, rules, back up, Ellie, hang on." So that's when Eugene tells him no, he's been bit, and Joel's like, "Okay, well, gotta put you down then," and like pulls up the gun, and he's about to shoot Eugene. Eugene pulls his gun out, but it's clearly empty. Like he pulls a pistol out, and the top, I don't know anything about guns, but the top is like, when it's cocked and loaded, the top is all the way forward. It was like way far back, so none of them even, like, Joel and Ellie are just looking at him like, "All right, dude." Joel's like, "You're empty." He's like, "Okay, fine." Throws the gun, and Eugene begs. He's like, "Please, just I've got time. Take me back to Jackson. I'll stay outside of the fence. You guys go get Gail. She can meet me out here so that I can say goodbye." And Joel is like, "No, we can't do that. That is against the rules. We cannot do that." And I think Joel's right here. And I'll talk about it more in a minute. But Ellie disagrees. She tells Eugene, "Hey, hold your hand out and count to 10 slowly and clearly." Now, if you'll remember back in season 1, that is what Marlene and the Fireflies made her do over and over and over again after she had gotten bit. So this is Ellie's little test to see what's going on with Eugene. Eugene counts to 10. Also, Eugene is played by Joey. They call him Joey Pants, but I don't know his real name. Let's look that up. Joey Pantoliano from the Sopranos. That's where I know him best from, as Ralph Cifaretto. Great character. But anyway, cool guest spot for him. But Ellie runs her little test, and she's like, "Joel, he has time. Let him see his wife. We'll tie him up, take him back, and, do this whole thing." Joel says, "Okay, fine. We'll do that. You go get the horses, and I'll walk with him." And Ellie's like, "All right, cool." She turns around to walk away, and we get this shot of just Ellie in the frame. Well, Ellie's facing the frame, but Joel is standing right next to her. And she turns back and looks at him like, "You're lying. I know you're lying." And Joel says, "I promise." Then Ellie leaves, and Joel's like, "All right, 10 feet. Go ahead. Get walking, Eugene." And this is, again, super similar to the end of season 1 when Ellie makes him swear that everything he said about the Fireflies was true, and he swears. Now, he doesn't swear this time. He promises, which will be important later, but keep that in mind. They're walking, and Eugene is talking to Joel. He's like, "Oh, the virus makes you cold. I didn't expect that." They then get to a fork in the road, and it was hard for me to read this the first time. And even on my rewatch, I still wasn't sure what I think's going on here. So they get to a fork in the road, and Eugene doesn't know which way to go. He's like, "Okay, which way?" Which was odd to me because, on the one hand, Eugene has probably done this route a million times, so he should know the way back. And so maybe the virus is already starting to take over, and he's no longer able to remember things as well. So it's clearly progressing pretty rapidly. And Joel is like, so I don't know. I've heard some people say that they think that this is the virus starting to take over, which I am inclined to agree, but I don't know. I don't think anything else really makes sense as to why he would forget a path he should definitely know. So I think it's probably just the virus has kicked in and, messing with him. Joel tells him to head right. He says, head right. Eugene takes a right. He walks out into this clearing, and there's this beautiful lake with the mountains in the background. And obviously Joel is not leading him back to Jackson. And Eugene immediately realizes this. And he's like, "Oh, no, 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 no. You can't do this to me." Like, blah, blah, blah. And Joel's like, "I need you not to turn around, number one." And, Joel has the gun up. And he tells Eugene, like, "If you have any last words for her, I'll pass them along." And Eugene, this was just such a good scene. from Joey Pants here. He says, last words for her. No, I need her last words to me. I'm dying. I'm terrified. Like, I need her last words. Like, he needs some comfort as he's going out. And it was just a very touching scene, obviously very sad. And he just wants to see Gail one last time. Joel tells him, if you love someone, you can always see them. And so we then get this shot where the camera is straight on Eugene, and Joel is behind him, and we can see him. But right when Joel says, if you love someone, you can always see him, the camera moves so that it's just Eugene's face in the frame. And you can see him like trying to focus here for a second. And then after a few seconds, he says, oh, I can see her. It then cuts back to just the woods. We can't see them anymore, and we don't hear a gunshot or anything, but we see the birds fly up, so we know Joel shot Eugene, which is, you know, I'll get into it in just a second. Ellie then shows up, and Joel's like, you know, I'm sorry, like, there was nothing I could do, like, I had no choice. Ellie's distraught. She's crying, like, not only because I'm sure she's sad about what just happened to Eugene, but now she knows that Joel lied to her at the end of season 1 because he swore that that's what happened, and then just it wasn't. He lied, and here again he has lied. He told Ellie that, oh yeah, we'll take him back to Jackson, let him see Gail, blah 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 blah, and he lied. That's not what he did at all. Now, there's been a lot of talk about, did Joel do the right thing by not taking Eugene back to Jackson? I think yes. You can't do this. He's been bitten. There are rules. This is a deadly virus. He could, like, it progresses very rapidly. No, we can't let him come back to Jackson alive. He is dead for all intents and purposes when they find him against that tree. So I agree that Joel was right by saying, no, we can't do this. Now, where Joel messed up is by lying to Ellie. He should have just said, no, Ellie, we can't do that. I don't care if he has time. What if he gets back and he just all of a sudden turns infected and bites Gail? And then we got to kill Gail. And then also, even if that doesn't happen, what about everyone else? Like, if someone's spouse gets bit out here next time, are we going to bring them back in and let them see him? It just creates a bad precedent. We can't have it. Again, the rules are the rules. And the rules are important in this instance. So I agree that you can't let Eugene come back to Jackson. But Joel cannot lie to Ellie and just then decide, oh no, I don't care what I promised her. I'm going to do whatever I want. So that was Joel's mistake. So Ellie is crying on the way back as they drag Eugene's body back to town. We then get a scene where Gail comes to like see the body, and Joel and Ellie are standing there. Tommy comes with Gail, and Joel tells her what happened, but he lies. Says, "Oh, he was bit when we found him." That wasn't a lie. He wanted you to know that he loved you, and he wished he could have said goodbye in person, but he didn't want to put you in danger, and he was brave, and that he ended it himself. So, a lie. He lied because that's not what happened, obviously. Now, I understand the need for the truth and why it's important, but Gail doesn't need to know what happened out there. She doesn't. She doesn't need to know that Eugene possibly could have made it back, and then Joel was just like, nah, screw that. I'm going to kill you because I have to. So, I don't know. I've heard some people be like, oh, we should have told her the truth. I don't think so. I think you just saved Gail like, it's just already bad enough. Her husband's dead very unexpectedly, which, I mean, I'm sure that happens to people in the apocalypse like this, especially when there's a virus going around. In the mushroom apocalypse. So this is not out of the ordinary, but that doesn't mean that you're ready when it happens. So I don't know. I think Joel did the right thing by lying to Gail. Now, obviously, I just said Joel needs to stop lying, and I do agree. But in this instance, it's just like, just he lied, but okay, he spared Gail more pain, which I don't always agree with lying for that reason, but I don't think Gail needs to know what all went down out there. I just don't think it doesn't do anything for Gail to know the truth because in the end, Eugene is dead. And how he got there is not that important to me. So I don't know. Maybe I'm being a little wishy washy here with what lies I'm cool with Joel telling, which lies I'm not. But this was a lie. I was like, all right, I get it. She really doesn't need to know about that. Ellie though disagrees. After Joel tells Gail this, Gail runs up and hugs Joel, and she's um, just trying to find some comfort in her grief. And Ellie says that's not what happened, and everybody's like, "What?" Gail's a little taken aback. Joel's like, "Whoa, you're not selling me up the river like this." And Ellie says, "He begged to see you. He had time. Joel promised to bring him to you. He promised us both." And Ellie's crying here, and and then Ellie says, and then he shot him. Gail then looks at Joel, slaps him, tells him to get away from her, and Joel backs up and he's looking at Ellie like, "What the hell? Why'd you just do me like that?" And Ellie looks at him and says, "You swore." And this was a line from a trailer that I thought we were going to get at a different point, but I was glad to get, a little bait and switch here. It's important to remember he didn't swear he was going to bring Eugene back. He promised he was going to bring Eugene back. He swore that what he said about the Fireflies was true. So this is Ellie saying like, "Hey, this is not really what we're talking about here. This Eugene stuff, very sad, but I'm talking about Salt Lake City. And you swore, and now I know you lied about it because you lied about this. It's the same thing. Circumstantial evidence, sure, but gotta say, she's building a pretty strong case for herself here. Now, I think Ellie's wrong in this situation because in the after the episode, Craig Mazin, the showrunner, says that Ellie told Gail this not to hurt Gail, but to punish Joel. And I don't think Gail needed to know all this information. I think it would have been fine to just leave it where it was, and then you can have this conversation with Joel later. But I think Ellie can just not take the lies anymore, and so she is lashing out at Joel, and unfortunately, Gail is just caught in the crossfire, which sucks, but whatever. We then cut 9 months later, and it's the New Year's Eve dance. So we've seen this already, but this time we get it from Joel's POV. Tommy, Maria, Joel, and Benji, Tommy and Maria's son, they're all sitting at a table, and they're having a good time drinking. New Year's Eve, having a blast. And Benji is very tired, so Tommy's like, he's gonna pass out in a second. I'm just gonna take him back, and then I'll come back. So Tommy tells Benji to say goodnight to Uncle Grumpy, and Benji says good night, Uncle Grumpy. Blah blah blah. And Joel's like, "You're gonna miss the countdown," and Tommy's like, "Well, I'll come back after, no big deal." He picks up Benji and he's walking out, and he's like, he pulls the classic "See you next year." Joel says it back to him, "See you next year." So then it's just Maria and Joel at the table, and Maria brings up the conversation that they had in the first episode about her calling him a refugee, and she's like, that was ungrateful. I want you to know that we are grateful for you, and that you mean a lot to us. Talking to Joel, like all of us, but especially me and Tommy. And then she says, as far as I'm concerned, Uncle Grumpy is family, and family helps each other out if you need it. And so I think Maria was just picking up on like what's going on with her and Ellie, and it's just like, hey, if you want to talk, like, I'll talk to you basically about it. So that was a good scene. We then get the Seth scene. So Dina and Ellie are out on the dance floor, and they kiss. They doesn't show the kiss again, but we know what happened from the first episode. And Seth drops the slur. Joel runs in, pushes her down. Ellie freaks out, screams at Joel in front of the whole town, embarrasses him, which is another callback to earlier in the episode when Javier was talking about when his dad broke his jaw, that he was so embarrassed because everybody knew it. What's up? What's up? Hello. We're just recapping season 2, episode 6 of The Last of Us right now. So Joel's obviously very embarrassed because he's just been, dressed down in front of the whole town by his de facto daughter, Ellie. So that was obviously sad to see. We then come back to the porch scene. And, Ellie she's walking back and Joel's on the porch. But this time, in the first episode, Ellie just walks past. She walks past and goes to the garage. All good. This time, she comes back. And we get the final scene from The Last of Us Part 2. One of my favorite scenes from the whole game. Incredibly powerful stuff. Ellie walks up, and Joel's drinking out of a mug. And she's like, "What are you drinking?" He's like, "Oh, just some coffee." And Ellie's like, "Where'd you get it?" And he's like, "Oh, those people that came through last week, I'm a little embarrassed about what I had to trade for it, though." And so then Joel's like, "So you and Dina, is she your girlfriend now?" And I liked this because it's shown that like Joel has progressed instead of, outright denying that Ellie's sexuality. Now he's accepted it and he's like taking an interest in it. He's like asking about Dina, and Ellie's like, "No, it was just a kiss. Like, I don't know why she did that." And Joel tells her, "Well, I don't know what Dina's intentions are, but she would be lucky to have you." Ellie then looks at him and says, "You're such an asshole." And then she says, like, "You lied. You lied to my face, and it was the same face. You lied." But I think I already knew that. I think I knew the whole time. She then says, "Joel, I'm going to give you one more chance. I'm going to give you one more chance to tell me what happened in Salt Lake City. If you lie to me, we're done." This is vastly different from the game, obviously, because in the game, we get the flashback to Ellie actually going to the hospital and finding the tape recorder where someone just basically tells her what happened. Here, she makes Joel confess. So, Ellie says, "If you lie to me one more time, I'm gone. So, this is your last chance, Joel. Don't lie." She then starts to ask her question. Were there other immune people? And Joel can't even verbally respond, but he's shaking his head. So here he nods, no, shakes his head. And then he said, she asks, "Were there raiders?" He shakes his head. And then she says, Did you? Like, that's all she says is, "Did you?" And it's clear she's like, "Did you kill them?" And Joel shakes his head, yes. And she's like, "And Marlene?" Shakes his head, yes. And he's crying at this point. And then Ellie asks, could they have made a cure? Joel shakes his head yes, because he believes they could have. I have thoughts about this. I won't divulge at this time. But let's say they can make a cure. How are they going to distribute this? It's the apocalypse. You can't send this Amazon to, the next town over. You're going to have to do this over horseback. I'm not buying this whole cure BS. That's all I'll say about it from now. Joel then tells Ellie to make a cure, it would have killed you. And Ellie says, "Well, then I should have died. My life would have mattered. And you took that from me. You took it from everyone." And she's crying, and it's very, very emotional scene. And Joel says that, yes, all that's true. He'll pay the price because now she's going to turn away from him. But if some way he could do that over, if he could have that moment again and, be able to make a different decision, he would do it exactly the same way. And Ellie says, "Well, because you're selfish." And he says, no, because I love you. So, like, I love you in a way you could never understand. And I've heard this conversation a lot lately too about I'm not a parent, so I don't know. But when you have a kid, it changes you. Like you love that kid so much that like you can't understand it as the kid. You can only understand it through the lens of being a parent. So I don't know. Now, I don't know. I don't want to speak on that because, like I said, I don't know. But that's what Joel tells her. And then Joel perfectly ties the episode back together by telling Ellie, if you should ever have one of your own, I hope you do a little better than I did. So he's passing that idea along from his dad, saying, like, I hope you do a little better than I did, and so on and so forth down the generations. Whew. We then get Ellie saying, I don't think I can forgive you for this. And Joel starts to really break down at this point. It's over. Calling the dogs piss on the fire. It's over, as my dad would say. But she then says, she says, I don't think I can forgive you for this. But she says, but I would like to try. And Joel kind of lights up a little bit, and then it cuts back to Seattle. Now, it's important to remember this was their last conversation. The way that they ended was, hey, we've got problems. I understand, but I would like to try to work through those problems. And so they were going to work it out. But now they didn't because the next day Joel is murdered. So it's so tough because that's the scene that gets me in the game every time. That they were like they'd been out on the rocks for a while, but they were gonna patch it up, but life intervened and didn't allow them. So very sad stuff. We then cut to Ellie in Seattle, and she is back at the theater. So after murdering Nora in the basement of the hospital, she's now back at the theater, and we're ready to progress to next week in the finale. Great episode. I'm. It's. I was wondering when we were going to get the flashbacks because in the game they're kind of sprinkled in here and there, but they just hit us with all of them at once, and I thought it worked so well. I think a large reason for that is that this episode was written by Craig Mazin, but also by Neil Druckmann and Haley Gross, who I think it's Hallie actually. Let me check that. I'm pretty sure it's Hallie. Hang on one sec. Oh, y'all getting storms, Dad? I'm almost done. So her name is Hallie. It's Hallie Gross. So it was written by them and also directed by Neil Druckmann, who was at Naughty Dog, made the game. So I think that's a lot of the reason why this worked so well. But yeah, it was just a great episode all around. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I can't wait to see the finale and see how the season is wrapped up. And then we'll have to wait 2 or 3 years for season 3. So that'll be fun. But that's about all I got for episode 6. If you did enjoy the recap and the reaction, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And I will be back next week to recap the final episode of season 2. So I'll see y'all then. Have a beautiful time. And yeah,